Welcome to the sixth and final episode of the How to Make a VR Game in Unity 6.2 course. In the previous video, we learned how to create advanced interaction like doors and drawers, and in this video, we'll look at how to use both the Ray Interactor and the Poke Interactor to interact with user interface and other interactable. But don't forget, the Patreon exclusive VR shooter is still available. It is a full VR shooter game made in just 1 hour, and you can get both the source project and the full tutorial by joining the community. The link is in the description. But without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we are back in Unity where we were left at the end of last episode with our advanced interaction over there, and now let's get started with the UI interaction with both a Ray and a Poke Interactor. But to create UI in our application, we first need to create a canvas. To do so, we can right-click in the hierarchy, go to UI, and then click on Canvas. Beautiful. As you can see, this has added a canvas game object and an event system. Now the canvas, if I double-click on it, it is like a huge rectangle that is sitting above my game, and as you guys can see, when I change the size of my game window, it also updates the size of the canvas. Now, starting from a canvas, you can build some UI. For example, I can right-click on the canvas, go to UI, and then select Panel, and this will create a panel exactly to the shape of my canvas, which I can use, or I can even tweak its look right there by changing its color or maybe its alpha value. But that's not it. We can of course add a panel, but we can also add other UI element. Like if I right-click, go to UI, I can click here on Text Mesh Pro. There we go. This will ask us to download the TMP importer, so let's click on Import TMP Essentials. Once that's done, we don't need to import the examples, so let's close this window. And here we can see that we have a text. If I press on T, I can increase the size of here this text area. And if I press on Alt key, I can keep it centered like so. Beautiful. Now I'm going to go on the text component, and here we can edit what's going on the text. For example, I can call this one example UI, and what I can do is center the alignment of the text with this center button and do it as well for the alignment with the middle alignment. Now I can even press on the W key and put it above like so, and even increase the font size to make this bigger. Beautiful, but that's not it. On top of text, we can also add other elements. If I right click on Canvas UI, you can see that there is a bunch of other, and the most important, of course, the buttons. So if I click on button, there you go. We can again press on T, increase the size, making it center with the Alt key. We can then go to its children, and we can even increase the font size over there. Beautiful. And finally, the last element that I'm going to add is right click UI, and this time I'm going to add a scroll bar. Let's put it down below, press on T, increase its size. And there you go, we have an example UI going on with here our canvas. Now, it is noteworthy that this is like the old way of building UI in Unity, and actually now there is a new way to do so. This new way is here using the UI toolkit in Unity 6.2. Now, this system is fairly new and a bit more complicated in my opinion for a beginner, so my advice is just to use the old way for once, but keep in mind that this actually exists and can speed up your workflow if you are working with UI a lot in your game. And I actually made this tutorial that will teach you everything you need to know about it for VR, so if you want to learn more about it, go check out this video. But now, let's go back to the tutorial, and here, as you guys can see, this UI is taking up all of the screen and is a huge element, well, in our game. So how can we make this UI part of the world and not display directly to the screen? To do so, we can click on Canvas, and here I'm going to change the render mode to world space. Beautiful. We can now set the scale to 0.01 on all axes, and here set the position to 0, 0. Beautiful. Now if I double click on the canvas, it will zoom directly to it, and we can see that now it is part of our world, which is what we want. So if I press on W, I can move it there and maybe put it just above the table like so if we want, because this is now an object in the world. We can even press on R and scale this UI. If we want, we can also resize the panel by pressing on T and resizing it like before. There you go, this looks good to me. And now let's find out how this looks by clicking on play. Okay, and here we go. As you can see, this UI now feels part of a world. I can move around it, I can go close or far from it, but I cannot interact with it. So let's see how we can fix this. And the first way that we are going to interact with it is using a Ray Interactor. So let's see how we can simply add it to our VR player. The first step to add a Ray Interactor is to go under the right hand. Here I'm going to search for Ray Interactor on the project window, and you should see here this game object. We can directly drag it over there under the right hand. Now, we've previously already worked with the Ray Interactor when we created the teleport interactor, which is also using this component. But in this case, we simply want to directly interact with the object in front of us. So to make this setup, we can simply set the endedness from none to right, then make sure that the UI interaction is enabled, and then here you can set some input to be able to interact with the UI. Now, in my case, I'm going to click here, search for right interaction, and down below you should see here the XRI right interaction UI press that we can select. Beautiful. Now for the next one, we can do the same. So right interaction, and this time select the UI press value. And finally, for the scroll input, let's do it again, but this time the UI scroll. And there we go. Now our Ray Interactor is set up to interact with UI using these buttons. And a thing that we need to fix is that the position is not set to 0, 0 over there, which will make, the ray offset a little bit. So let's set it to 0, 0, 0, so that it starts directly on the right hand. Beautiful. Okay, so if you want it, you could actually add another UI Ray Interactor, not on the right hand, but on the left hand. But in my case, I will keep it simple and just make it so that we can only interact with UI with the right hand. But now that's not it, because we have the interactor, but we actually need to make this UI interactable. To do this, we first need to go to the event system. Remember, this event system was added when we created the canvas, and here we can see that we have here the UI input module, the default one, which is using the mouse and the arrow key to interact with UI. And in our case, we want to remove this one and add a XR UI input module, which is basically the same thing, but taking into consideration the XR inputs. But there is a bunch of action here that we need to set up. We can quickly fill them up by simply clicking over there. And here you should see a preset already configured for us. So let's select it and close this window. Beautiful. And finally, the last step is to select the canvas and here add a track device graphic raycaster component, which will make it so that this workspace canvas is interactable with a ray. And just like this, everything is set up. Let's click on play to find out if we can interact with this UI. And there you go, as you can see, it works. We can now interact with both the button and the slider. Everything is looking good, but there is a little issue. The issue is that this ray is always showing, which is a bit annoying. So to fix this, we can simply go back to the Ray Interactor, and here down below you should see the XR Interactor line visual, which will allow you to tweak the visual of the ray. And in my case, I'm going to select the invalid color gradient, and here select the alpha value of the first element and drag it to 0 so that the ray only appears when it interacts with something. So if we click on play, as you can see, it works. Now the ray only shows when it interacts with the UI, but it also shows when we interact with the other interactable. Now, if we leave play mode and select one of the objects, as you can see, under the XR grab interactable, we can see that the interaction layer mask of this grabbable is set to default. And if we go under our Ray Interactor, we can see that this is the same interaction layer mask on this interactor. So if we want to make it so that this Ray Interactor cannot interact with the other object, we can simply here click on interaction layer mask, add layer, and here add a layer called, for example, Ray. Beautiful. Now we can go back to the Ray Interactor, select interaction layer mask, set it back to nothing, and then select Ray, so that only the interactable with this layer mask will be able to be interacted with this Ray Interactor. Now, if I click on play, there you go, everything works as expected. I can interact with the UI and I cannot interact with the other interactable, which is what we want. But what if it wasn't what we wanted? What if we actually wanted to grab some object with the ray and interact with them? So let me show you how we can actually use not only the Ray Interactor on UI, but also on other objects. Okay, so to give you an example, let me grab one of these objects, for example this one, and I'm going to press on Ctrl D. There we go, this will create the grabbable cube attach transform 1, and I'm going to rename it Ray Interactable at the end. We can press on W, put it to the side, maybe increase a little bit its size, and what I'm going to do is go down below in the XR Grab Interactable and set the interaction layer mask to both default and also Ray. This will make it so that now this interaction layer mask can interact with the Ray Interactor, but if we go back to the Ray Interactor, we can see that we have some input for the UI element, but we don't have down below input to select and activate game object. So let's fix this by clicking here and adding a write interaction. Here, let's click on select. Then let's do write interaction select value. Then write interaction activate. Where is it? It's here. And finally, write interaction activate value. And there we go. This will be the input that we need to grab and interact with interactable object. So if I click on play, look at how cool that is. I can interact with the Ray, not only with the UI, but also with this grabbable object. And when I press on the creep button, I can trigger its interactable component and I can grab it. That's beautiful. And it also still works with the other interactor. For example, I can use the left hand that has a direct interactor to grab it as well. So everything works perfectly. Now, just to give you an example, this is of course using a grabbable object, which has XR Grab Interactable, but if you want to interact with 3D object with the Ray and not have to grab them, there are also other solutions. So let me show you how this works. If I right click, go to 3D object, cube, I can rename this one Simple Ray Interactable. Let's put it next to the UI, press on R, scale it down, maybe rotate it a little bit and place it to the side. Oh, it's not actually next to it, so let me put it back there. There we go, it looks good. And now if we simply want to interact with it with the Ray, we can simply click on Add Component and add a simple interactable. Beautiful. A simple interactable is basically a simpler version of the XR Grab Interactable. On the interaction layer mask, we can set it to first nothing and then simply make it interactable by the Ray Interactor like so. And now, using the interactable event down below, we can trigger anything we want when we interact with it. So, for example, let's change its color when we over-enter and over-exit. For this, I'm going to go back to the asset folder, right-click, create, material. I'm going to rename it red, and I'm going to change its color to red. Beautiful. Now we can click back on the Simple Ray Interactable. Here, click on plus for the over-enter. Drag the Simple Ray Interactable there and select the Mesh Renderer material. Beautiful. And now let's simply override the material with the red material that we just created. And in the case that we over-exited, we want to do the same stuff, which is select the Mesh Renderer material. But this time, for the material, I'm going to set it back to the lit default material, which is just showing here, but if I click over there, it should show up and we can select it. This is the default gray material that the cube has. And now let's click on play to find out if we can interact with this cube, just like so. Okay, and there we go. As you can see, it works. I can now interact with also this Simple Ray Interactable and it turns red when I interact with it. That's awesome. Now, by the way, I didn't show you this with the example UI, but of course, if we go under the canvas buttons and that we select the button, for example, you can see that you have event here, which can fire any custom behavior when you interact with the button. And it's actually the same with here, the scroll bar. You have a onValue change event that is able to trigger anything depending on the value of the scroll bar as well. Okay, and just like this, we have learned how to use the Ray to interact with not only UI but 3D object and also be able to trigger any type of interactable. For example, with this grab interactable over there, but there are definitely some bugs happening now with the different interactor that we currently have with this setup. So let me show you. Okay, and there you go. As you can see, this is what's going on because we have a grab interactor, a Ray interactor, and a teleport interactor. We can use all of them at the same times in our current setup. For example, I can grab this cube, but also still be able to cast a Ray. And while I cast a Ray, I can also still teleport, which is like not the best thing to do. So how can we make it so that only one type of interactor is only available at a certain time? And we can actually do so with a very handy component. If we go under the right hand, we can here click on add component and add an interaction group. Beautiful. Now on this interaction group, we can actually add all of the interactor that we have. For example, the teleport interactor, the right direct interactor, and the ray interactor. And using this interaction group, we make it so that only one of them can be triggered at a certain time, which is exactly what we want. So let me show you if I click on play. Okay, and as you can see, it fixed our issue. If we grab the cube and try to cast a ray or even teleport now, it doesn't work. Same thing happens when we try to cast a ray on here the cube and that we try to teleport at the same time. It still doesn't work, which is what we want. But there is only one bug still happening, because you can see that if I'm trying here to interact with the UI, with my ray, I can still teleport even with the interaction group. And I'm not sure if this is a bug or something else, but if we go under the VR player, remember that we added here the teleportation activator component to activate the teleportation a while ago. And I think that we can actually fix this bug simply using this teleportation activator script. So let me show you how we can do this. There we go. On this script, I'm going to simply add a public reference to the XR Ray Interactor, which will be the Ray Interactor that we have. And simply, when we perform the action, I just want to make sure that if there is a Ray Interactor and that this Ray Interactor is overing a UI game object, in this case, we return and we don't activate the teleport interactor. And same goes on when we are actually using the teleport interactor and overing a UI. What I want to do is make sure that the teleport interactor get disabled. So for this, I'm going to add a public function called disable teleport ray, which will simply do teleport interactor.gameObject.setActive false. And here on the start, I'm going to do ray interactor.on over UI over enter dot add listener and add as a listener a new function created with the disable teleport ray that we just created, and it needs some parentheses there. There we go. And beautiful, just like this, it should fix the issue even with the ray interacting with UI. So if we save, go back to Unity, there we go. We can drag the ray interactor over there. And now we can click on play to find out if this works. Okay, and here you go. As you can see, it works. When I'm interacting with the ray with the UI, I cannot teleport. And when I'm trying to teleport before interacting with the UI, the teleportation disables when I interact with the UI, which is what we want now. So everything is working, we have no more bug, and we have no issue with different interactors. And of course, one thing is still missing with this tutorial, because I mentioned that we could interact with the UI with both a ray and a poke in the introduction. And well, it's time to show you the second star of this show, the poke interactor. So let's simply select this canvas and I'm going to rename it far canvas. You can then press on Ctrl D to duplicate it. And I'm going to put it over there, maybe a bit closer to the player. We can reduce its size, change its rotation, put it maybe near the edge of the table, like so. Beautiful, now it looks good, and we can even rename it near canvas. Okay, so now that we have a canvas that is a bit close to us, how can we actually interact with it? And for this, we are going to add a poke interactor to our list of interactor. Let's go on the project folder and search for poke interactor. And here we have a prefab already set up for us. We can drag it under here the right hand, and let's do this as well for the left hand. Beautiful. Now on this poke interactor, we don't need any input. Well, for the poke interactor, because it only needs the position of one object, which is here the attach transform. Now let me select both the poke interactor, set their position to 0, 0, 0. And what we can do is select the poke interactor on the right hand. Under it, we should see here the poke point, which is referenced as the attach transform. And what we can do is actually make it so that the poke point will follow here the tip of the index finger of the hand model. To do so, we can go under the right hand, go under his fingers bone, and here under index, we have the last bone of the right hand model, which should show us here the tip of the index, and we can simply drag the poke point over there under the index 3. But as you can see, we have an error by doing so. So to fix this, we can simply right click on the poke interactor, prefab and click on unpack completely. Beautiful. Now we can drag back the poke point under the index 3 and we can reset its position to 0, 0, 0 as well as its rotation to 0, 0 and 0. Beautiful. Now let's try to maybe simply offset a little bit the poke point so that it is coming out of the index. And as you can see, the tip here needs to face the direction of the index. So I'm going to press on E and rotate it 90 degrees on the y-axis. Let's maybe move it a bit like so. And this looks perfect. So now one thing is missing. It is to actually... So now that it's done, we can go back to the Poke interactor, set the indentness to right. And now everything is set up. What's left is to do the same thing, but for the left end. So let's go to the Poke interactor, set the indentness to left, right click, prefab, unpack completely, go under the left end model, go under the index finger and drag the poke point as a child of the index 3, reset its position, make it come out of the index, rotate it 90 degrees on the y-axis. And there you go, this looks very good to me. We can now save. And now in our case, we have two beautiful poke interactors that should be able to interact with the UI directly. And this is also thanks to the UI interaction that is set to enable. Now you can actually change the settings of the poke to know when it is counting as an over or a click. But in my case, I think I will keep this default value as is. And let's simply find out how this works by clicking on play. And there you go, as you can see, it works. We can now interact with the Poke interactor with this UI directly. That's awesome. And it works actually for both ends with the poke point following the tip of our index finger. But we have still a little issue. And the issue is that the Ray interactor is also showing, which is not very good. But we have actually already made the solution to this problem. If we go to the right hand, we can see that here we have the interaction group. But there are some settings here to override some of the interactor in case that one is triggering on top of another one. In my case, I'm going to add actually here the Poke interactor that we added. And to fix the issue of having both the Poke and the Ray interactor showing at the same time, we can go under the Poke interactor and make sure that it can actually override the Ray interactor so that when the Poke interactor triggers, it will disable the Ray automatically. So now let's find out if this works. And there you go guys, it works now when we approach with the poke and that we start to hover the example UI. It disables and overrides the Ray interactor, so now everything is looking good. And there you go guys, you've learned how to use both the Poke and Ray interactors, and as you guys know, all good things come to an end, and this is the last episode of the How to Make a VR Game in Unity 6.2 course. I hope that you enjoyed this journey and that you learned something new. I want to make a special shout out to you watching this video, because you watching my content and supporting my work is what makes it possible for me to actually make it. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. As always, make sure to join us on Patreon, like and subscribe if it's not already the case. See you soon. Bye bye.